Hi, it's Brian, the math guy from Hamilton Education. Welcome back. We're going to be going over the mathematics problems on the 392, SAT 392. Now, remember, you don't have to go through every problem. You can click on the scroll bar down below. It should be indicated, hover over it, and you can go directly to the problems that you really just want to look at. So we're going to be doing the SAT 392, starting with Math Section 1. Let's get to it. All right, so here we are on the Math section, Module 1. Section 2 is Modules 1 and 2, so there's two sections. 22 questions, 35 minutes. You should know these instructions ahead of time. Know that you do have the geometry and trigonometry reference right here, and how to enter your answers. You'll be taking the test online when you actually take it, but you want to make sure that you know this rubric for how to enter the problems. So I guess you can edit that in as an intro to the math. Now let's get to the problems. Module 1, problem 1. The line graph shows the percent of cars for sale. So percent of cars on a given day by model year. So model year is the horizontal axis. That's what's going into this function or representation, and the percent of cars for sale that particular day that they took it in that particular year. The question, for what model year is the percent of cars for sale the smallest? Well, on the graph, we want the lowest point that's on the graph, and we can see that right here. And that would be for the model year 2014. So C, 2014. And that's a good start because C rhymes with C, which is yes in Spanish. Question 2. For a particular machine that produces beads, 29 out of every 100 beads it produces have a defect. So if a bead is produced by the machine and it's selected at random, what is the probability of selecting a bead that has a defect? Well, they tell us 29, the number of successful defects out of every 100. So we're given this proportion or ratio, I should say, and the answer appears magically. And again, it's C. Question 3 on Module 1. We're given that M is parallel to N. So we know that we have parallel lines. These two here have the same slope. Now, T is intersecting both lines. And since they have the same slope, then we have this idea of vertical angles being congruent and alternate interior angles being congruent and alternate exterior angles being congruent. And so if we're looking for the measure of x, well, x would be the same as this angle here. It corresponds to that angle. And these two angles add to 180. So if I take 33 away from 180, I get the measure of x, which is 147 degrees. So 180 minus 33, you might need a calculator, but if you don't, you're still going to come up with the right answer. Now we're on the horse. Question 4. We're given data set X, data set Y. The list gives the values in data sets X and Y. Which statement correctly compares the mean of X and the mean of Y? Well, note that X, 59913, and y, 5, 9, 9, 13, and 27, are the same except for that 27 added to the end of y. And we can calculate this. I mean, if I add together here and here, I'm going to get 18 plus 18 is 36, and I divide that by 4, and I get 9. So the mean of x is equal to 9. I can add together, well, I'm going to get 36, but then I'm going to add on another 27. So the mean of data set y is going to be 63 divided by 5 pieces of data, which is going to be 12.6. So we can see right away that the mean of x is less than the mean of y, which is what B says. So B is the correct answer. Question 5. A rocket contained 467,000 kilograms of propellant before the launch. And then 21 seconds after the launch, it had 362,105 kilograms of propellant. And we want to know on average, approximately how much propellant did the rocket burn every second? Well, this is a linear idea because they gave me at time 0, I had 467,000 kilograms of propellant. And at time 21, I had 362,105 kilograms. So if I take the change in y, i.e. kilograms, I'm going to have 362,105 minus 467,000 over 21 minus 0, respectively. I got a calculator. I'm allowed to use a calculator, and I get the slope of this relationship would be minus 4,995. And so it's using 4,995 kilograms per second. So A is the correct answer. For problem 6, in problem 6, f 4x plus 2 equals 12. Well, what's the value of 16x plus 8? Well, note something. If I take the equation 4x plus 2, and that equals 12, and I take the whole darn thing, and I'm just going to multiply it by 4, and I'm going to get 16x, 4 times 4x, plus 4 times 2 is 8. Well, that's the thing I want, and that would equal 4 times 12, which is 48. So 48 is the correct answer, B. Question 7. An object is kicked from a platform. The equation h equals negative 4.9t squared plus 7t plus 9 represents this situation where h is the height of the object above the ground in meters, t seconds after it was kicked. Which number represents the height in meters from which the object was kicked? Well, that's going to be when t is 0. And if I plug 0 in for t here, then h of 0 is going to give me 9 meters above the ground. So D is the correct answer. Question 8. The equation defines the function f. For what value of x does f of x reach its minimum? Well, know right away this is a quadratic. And quadratics have a U or bell shape. And if the leading coefficient is positive, then this thing is going to open up, which means it's going to have a minimum at its vertex. And if we're in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, well, we know right away that when x equals negative b over 2a, that's going to be the x value of the vertex. And so if I look at that, well, that's going to be 50 over 8. And so that's the value of x where it reaches its minimum. So 50 over 8, or I could write that as 25 over 4, or I could write that as 6.25. Any of those are valid answers. Question 9. A small business owner budgets $2,200 to purchase candles, and the owner must purchase a minimum of 200 candles to maintain a discounted pricing. And if the owner pays $4.90 to purchase small candles and $11.60 per candle to purchase large candles, what is the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget and maintain the discounted pricing? Whew. Okay, so we've got, in effect, a system of inequalities where we've got money that's got to be less than or equal to 2,200. That's our budget. And we've got a total of 200 candles. So let me make a little space here to make it a little bit more easy to see. You can easily graph this thing. If you have a graphing calculator, it would be quite simple to set up, but you can do it by hand. I mean, if I have 2 axes, and I'm going to call my axes length, or pardon me, large and small. And so I'm going to let S equal the number of small candles that are possible to keep the discount. And I'm going to let L equal the number of large candles. And in effect, what they told us then is that if we pay $4.90 for every small candle and $11.60 for every large candle, the money has got to be less than the budget of $2,200. And I know for a fact that if I take the number of smalls and I add the number of larges and I have to keep that to get the discount, well, this has got to be greater than equal to 200. I got to have a minimum of 200. And I can graph these things quite readily. If I look at the S plus L is greater than 200. Well, if this is L and this is S, and if L equals 0, then I can get 200 smalls. And if S equals 0, I can get 200 bigs. And if I look at the first inequality, the money equation, if L equals 0, then I'm up like 485. And if S equals 0, well, I'm going to be more than 200, a little bit more than actually a little bit less than 200, pardon me. And so if I connect the S plus L, and I connect the 4.9S plus 11.6L, then I get a graph that looks sort of like that. Actually, the intersection will be closer to the 200. And I can find the intersection on the graph. This point is going to be 182.09, 17.91. The scale is a little bit off, but this tells me that, well, if I have 182 of these and 18 of these, well, that's 200. I'll get the discount, and the minimum I have to buy of the, maximum I have to buy of the largest would be 182. Now, I could have solved this algebraically. I could have looked at the point, because these are both or equal to, I could look at the point where they're equal. I could solve for that. I mean, I could say that S equals 200 minus L. And then I can plug that in for S into the first equation. And so I'm going to have 4.9 times 200 minus L plus 11.6 times L would be equal to 2200 at the point where they intersect. And if I solve this, well, I'm going to end up with L is going to be equal to 2200 minus 4.9 times 200, and that's all going to be over 11.6 minus 4.9 if I algebraically solve for L. And if I do that, I get L equals 182.09. And since I can't have part of a large candle, I clip that off and I've got 182. So my answer is 182. I can do it a quick way by graphing, and that's where a graphing calculator really comes in handy. Or I can do it algebraically. It takes a little bit longer, but I'll still get the correct answer. Number 10. In number 10, in the linear function f of 0 equals 8, and f of 1 equals 12. Which function defines f? Well, first I'll point out this is the y-intercept. And I'll also point out they just told us that 0, 8, and 1, 12 were on this particular function. So I should have then the slope is going to be 12 minus 8 over 1 minus 0, which equals 4. So comparing that to the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, we just plug in 4 and 8, and D is the correct answer. Question 11. We're told the function f of w equals 6w squared. And this gives the area of a rectangle. So if I draw a rectangle, I know that if I have w as the width, and the length then is 6 times the width, well, the area, yes, will be 6w squared, length times width. And so if we look at that, this is a function where we can tell the area given the width. And so if f of 14 equals 1,176, well, the width must have been 14. And so the width of the rectangle is 14, and the area must be 1176. So A is your best answer. Number 12, we're given a diagram of a circle. It has two chords, S, Q, and PR. They go through the center O. They told us that the circumference is 144. Well, then that means that half of the circumference would be 144 pi, Half of the circumference would be 72 pi. And they said the length of arc PS is twice the length of arc PQ. So if I call this X, then this has to be 2X. And note that, well, this angle and this angle are the same. So this has to be X and this has to be 2X. And half of the circle would be 3X. And if I want to know the length of QR, which is 2/3 of what I just indicated, then I want 2/3 of 72 pi. Well, that's going to be 48 pi. So B is the correct answer. Number 13, a company that provides whale watching tours takes a group of, 21 people at a time. And the company's revenue is $80 for an adult, $60 per child. And the revenue of a group that had both adults and children in it was $1,440. And we want to know how many of this group were children. Well, this is no different than the one we just did previously. We have to take the words and translate them into a system and then solve the system. And so if I let C equal the number of children and A equal the number of adults, then I know for a fact that A plus C is 21. And 80 times the number of adults plus 21 times 60 times the number of children has to be the amount of money they made. And so I can use any method here. I mean, the previous one I used substitution, so I'll do that again because it's pretty easy to do. This thing tells me that A would be 21 minus C. And so I can just plug that in for A in the previous equation. So 80 times 21 minus C, which is A, plus 60C has to be 1440. And so 1680 minus 80C plus 60C has to equal 1440. So if I subtract 1680 from both sides and gather my C terms together, I'm going to get negative 20C equals negative 240. And so C equals 12. There were 12 children. So C is your answer. And just to finish it out, there were 9 adults. Question 14. The function h is defined by h of x equals 4x plus 28. And the graph of y equals h of x has an x-intercept at a0 and a y-intercept at 0b, where a and b are constants. And I want to know what's the value of a plus b. Well, the x-intercept comes when y equals 0. So 4x plus 28 equals 0. Better yet, let me do it this way. 4a plus 28 equals 0 tells me that a has to be negative 7 because this thing would have to be negative 28. And the y-intercept comes when x is 0. So b equals 4 times 0 plus 28. So b is 28. And I want to know what is a plus b. So negative 7 plus 28 equals 21. So a is your answer, 21. Number 15. In number 15, we're given a big, ugly polynomial. And we're told that x plus b is a factor. And b is a positive constant. What is the smallest possible value of b? Well, if I look at that thing, I would like to be able to factor it, because if x plus b is a factor, then I should be able to identify that once I do that. And I note that every coefficient has a factor of 2, and every coefficient has a factor of x. So I can pull out 2x from every term. And I'll get 2x times x squared plus 21x plus 104, and I'll set that equal to 0. And then I'll see if I can factor that big quadratic there, and I can. I want two numbers that multiply to 104, but add to 21, and 8 and 13 work really good. So I can rewrite that as 2x, x plus 13, x plus 8 equals 0. And I remember that this is going to be 2 times x plus 0, and 0 isn't positive, but 13 and 8 are, and the smallest possible value is 8, so B is 8. Number 16. In the given system of equations, so we've got a parabola that intersects, if it has a solution, this line. A is a positive constant, and it does say it intersects at exactly one place. Now, note, I said that one of them was a parabola. And so one of them was a parabola, so it has to open down. And it intersects a horizontal line. And the only way it can do it at one place is if it opens down. Or pardon me. Let me restart that one. I don't know why I got fumble mouth there. Hold on. Cut. Retake. Problem 16. In the given system of equations, A is a positive constant. The system has exactly one distinct real solution. And I want to know what's the value of A. Well, this is a parabola. And so it's got a positive leading coefficient. It's going to open up. And it's going to intersect this horizontal line. Let me put it in red. Y equals negative 1.5. In order to do that, it's got to be a perfect square. It's either on that side or the other side. But it's got to be a perfect square and just bounce off once. Probably over here because of the plus 8x. Well, then I've got that x squared plus 8x plus A would then equal negative 1.5. Or x squared plus 8x plus A plus 1.5 would have to equal 0. And if that's true, then I've got, well, one real solution. So I must have completed the square by taking half of 8 and squaring it. So this must equal x, pardon me, x squared plus 8x plus 16. Because that would equal x plus 4 squared. And so working on this idea, then A plus 1.5 must equal 16, which means that A has to be 14.5. Or you could rewrite that as 29 over 2. Either of those were good answers. Problem 17. We're given a polynomial that's been factored. And I note right away that if x equals negative 6, or negative 5, or negative 4, then this thing is going to equal 0. And if I take that thing and move it down 3, then wherever I've got negative 6, negative 5, negative 4 equaling 0 minus 3, because all this said was to take this thing, f of x, which would be x plus 6, x plus 5, x minus 4, minus 3. Well, if I stick in negative 6, negative 5, or 4, I'm going to get 0 minus 3. So that points me directly at B, which shows a shift down of the zeros. Question 18. In question 18, for the function q, the value of q of x decreases by 45% for every increase of x by 1. So what they just described here is that q of x is equal to some principal value times 1 minus some rate to the x. And they give us the rate. It's 0.45. And they tell us when x is 0, well, that would mean we'd have q of x equals p times 0.55 to the x. There's 1 minus 0.45. And when x equals 0, this thing equals 1. So this thing must be 14. So putting that all together, q of x must be 14 times 0.55 to the x, which is C. Question 19. The graph of y equals f of x plus 14 is shown. Which equation defines the function f? Well, we're using the same idea that we did in the question we just went over in 18, is that this represents a shift up of 14 of the function f of x. So if this is f of x plus 14, then if we take the whole line and drag it down 14, we should get to the new f of x. Now, note the slope is negative 1/4. Well, all the answers have negative 1/4, but all we needed to have was 2 minus 14 would equal negative 12, the new y-intercept. So A is our answer. Question 20. The side lengths of a right triangle. So this is a right triangle are given. And we see RS is 20, so I'll say RS is 20. And ST is, actually, I'm going to draw it the other way around. It'll look better. Let me remove that. And we'll say R is here, and that's 20. There's S, and there's T, and that's 48. And TR is 52. Now, it's a right triangle. And they say that UVW is similar. So UVW, named in the same order, RST, UVW. And they tell us V corresponds to T. And this is V. It looks like a U, but that's V. So those are the both right angles. But one thing I want to point out is, peeking at the answers, that this looks like a Pythagorean triple. I know that 20 is the same as 5 times 4. And I note that 48 is the same as 12 times 4. And I know that 52, like a deck of cards, is the same as 13 times 4. And so we have a 5, 12, 13 right triangle. In fact, we could even say that this is 5, and this is 12, and this is 13 times some number, and or just call it a 5, 12, 13. Well, that allows us to find the tan of W quite readily. It's going to be 5 over 12, which is the same as 20 over 48. So 5 over 12, B is your answer. Question 21. In question 21, let me do this one in black. 1 gallon of paint is going to cover 220 square feet. So 1 gallon per 220 square feet. And we've got W square feet. So W square feet. And we're going to paint the room twice. So 2, because we got to double it. And if I clean this up, well, the square feet will cancel. I'll be left in gallons, which is what I needed. The 2 will factor with the 220, and I'll be left with W over 110 gallons. So A is the correct answer. Question 22, last one on this section. We're given that some number A is 110% greater than the number B. And remember, when they say 110% greater, I'm taking 100% of A and I'm adding on 110% of A. So this is B right there with respect to A. Well, that 110%, as a decimal, that's going to be 2.1. So A equals 2.1 of B. And they told us that B is equal to 90% less. Well, 100 minus 90% is going to be 10%. So in a calculator, I would enter 0.1 of 47, which equals 4.7. And so A must equal 2.1 times 4.7, which is 9.87 on a calculator. So 9.87 answers the question, what is the value of A? Question 1 on Module 2. There are 55 students in a Spanish club, and a sample of the Spanish club students was selected at random and asked whether they intended to enroll in a new study program. Of those surveyed, 20% responded that they intended to enroll in a new program. Based on this survey, which of the following is the best estimate of the total number of Spanish club students who intend to enroll in this study program? Well, we're going to take 20% of 55. 20% is 1/5. And so 1/5 of 55, you can see quite quickly it's 11. So A is the correct answer. Question 2. Jay walks at a speed of 3 miles per hour and runs at a speed of 5 miles per hour. And if he walks for W hours and runs for R hours, for a combined total of 14 miles, which equation represents this situation? Well, if he goes 3 miles in 1 hour and he walks for W hours, hours cancel, and we're going to have 3W. And we add on to that 5 miles in 1 hour running times our hours running, and the hours cancel, and we're going to have 5R miles. And that's going to total to 14 miles. So A is the correct answer. Question 3. The scatter plot shows the relationship between two variables, X and Y. A line of best fit is also shown. Which of the following equations best represents the line of best fit? Well, right away I can see that the y-intercept is positive. It looks like it's about 2.8, which means it can't be C and it can't be D. And I can see the slope if I go over, say, from 0 to 7. I'm going up then from 3 to 15. And so I can see the slope is going to be positive with a y-intercept at 2.8. So the only one that jives with that would be A. Note this one has a negative slope. A has a positive slope. Question 4, we're given a linear function. The slope is negative 0.05 times m. plus 12.1. And we're given the premise that given the function g models the number of gallons that remains from a full tank. So when we haven't driven any miles, a full tank must be 12.1. According to the model, about how many gallons of gasoline are used to drive each mile? Well, it's got to be the slope. And so we're taking out 0.05 gallons of gasoline for every mile we drive. So A is the correct answer. Question 5. The given equation relates the positive numbers b, x, and y. Which equation correctly expresses x in terms of b and y? So we want to solve for x. And if they tell me that 11x over y equals 1 over 7b, well, I'm just going to multiply both sides by y over 11. Multiplying the left side of the equation, well, that's going to turn this into a 1, and I'll isolate x. And then I just have to multiply 1 over 7b times y over 11. So x should be equal to y over 77b, which is right next door. C is the correct answer. Question 6. The graphs of the given equations in the xy plane intersect at the point xy. What is a possible value of x? Well, I know for a fact that these things are equal because the y would be the same. So x squared minus 5 must equal 76, which means that x squared must equal 81 by adding 5 to both sides. So x then must equal either positive or negative 9. If I square either one of those, I get 81. So B is my answer. Question 7. In question 7, we're given a system of inequalities, and they tell us that we have a solution. And I can see right away that y is definitely greater than 14. 53 is greater than 14. So I must have that 4x plus 53 is less than 18, because I can just plug that in then for y. And so 4x must be less than negative 35. And x must be less than negative 35 over 4, which is negative 8.75. You can put that in a calculator if you need to. And I want a number less than that. Well, to the left of that on the number line is negative 9. That's less than. So I'm going to say x is negative 9, and A is the answer. And I get showered with a point. Well, they adjusted into points, but it felt good. Question 8. Out of 300 seeds that were planted, 80% sprouted. Well, 80% as a decimal is 0.80 or 0.8. I can put that into a calculator, and if I multiply that times 300, I get that 240 of the seeds sprouted. 240. Question 9. The function f is defined by f of x equals 4 times x. For what value of x does f of x equal 8? So they said 4x has to equal 8, which means that x equals 8 divided by 4, which is 2. Which is your answer? Question 10. Which expression is equivalent to this ugly rational thing where x has got to be greater than 7? Well, if I look at this, I've got to be able to factor it because all the ones below look like I factored something, except for maybe those last two. But let's check this out. If I look at the top, I can factor x minus 7, kind of using the distributive property in reverse, and rewrite this as 8x minus 3 times x minus 7. And I can factor a 2 from both terms on the bottom, and I'm going to get 2 times the quantity x minus 7. And then I can factor these guys as a virtual 1. I know x isn't going to be 7. They told me that. And what is left over is 8x minus 3 over 2, which is b. Question 11. Line P is defined by 2y plus 18x equals 9. And line R is going to be perpendicular to line P. Well, I can take this and clean it up a little bit. I can write it as y equals negative 9 plus 9 half. Well, pardon me, negative 9x plus 9 halves. So I subtracted 18x from both sides divided by 9. So the slope of this is negative 9. And the slope perpendicular to this then, slope, should be, well, opposite reciprocal. So 1 over 9. Flip it over, take the opposite sign, which is C. Question 12. We had a problem earlier that dealt with this idea of simple growth, exponential growth, the idea that accumulation by time t is going to be our initial amount times 1 plus or minus some rate to time. So a function of t here. Now, given that, we can see a couple of things, that at time 0, we would have had 8,000. And we can also see that our decrease of 35% or 1 minus 0.35. And so it is decreasing by 35%. Now, at the end of 98 would have been when time was 0, because we're going since the end of 98. So we would have had 8,000 at the end of 98 when time was 0. And we take that into account compared to the answers below. The only one that says that, the estimated number of coupons sent at time 0 was 8,000. So D is the correct answer, because when t equals 0, everything in the parens equals 1, and we're left with the initial value. Question 13. We're told that triangle XYZ is similar to triangle RST. So we've got one triangle XYZ, and we've got some other triangle RST that's the same shape. In fact, when they say XYZ is similar to RST, then angle X and angle R are the same measure, and angle Y and angle S are the same measure, and angle Z and angle T are the same measure. By the way we write them, in the order we write them, they correspond. And they said that measure of angle Z is 20, and that 2 times XY equals RS. Well, angle Z corresponds to angle T, which means it's the same measure. And so these two are the same thing, and this is just kind of distracting you. But the answer then would be C. Question 14. In question 14, one of the equations in a system of 2 linear equations is given above, and the system has no solution. Well, as soon as they say that, the lines are parallel. They never intersect, so they don't have a solution. There's no point where they cross. And the slope of this one is 6, and parallel lines have the same slope. So we want the equation that has a slope of 6 and doesn't go through 18. Well, note that this is the same as A. And these don't have a slope of 6. So it's got to be B. And it is. B would be parallel to the line given. Question 15. What is the area in square centimeters of a rectangle with a length of 34 and a width of 29? So 29 by 34. There's 29. There's 34. And area equals length times width. So 29 times 34, which is going to be 986. So 986 square centimeters. Question 16. In question 16, the solution to the given system of equations is xy. So these two lines cross somewhere. And I can use any method that I want to solve these things. In fact, watch what I'm going to do here. If y equals 4x plus 1, I can just substitute this in for y. So 4 times 4x plus 1 is 16x plus 4. There's 4y. That's got to be equal to 15x minus 8. If I subtract 15x from both sides and subtract 4 from both sides, well, I get what x is. X is negative 12. And I know that y is going to be 4 times that, so 4 times negative 12 plus 1. So y is going to be negative 47. And if I look at now x minus y, well, that's going to be negative 12 minus negative 47, which becomes plus 47. And the answer then is positive 35. Question 17. We're given a quadratic equation equals 0, and we want to know how many distinct real solutions does this equation have? Well, remember when it's in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form, then we can use the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula tells me that, well, if this equals 0, then x is going to be negative b over 2a plus or minus rad b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And the thing inside the radical, which we call the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, that'll tell me how many real or complex solutions I'll have. Remember, if b squared minus 4ac is positive, I'll have 2 real solutions. I'll have 1 real solution if b squared minus 4ac equals 0. But I'll have no real solutions, only complex solutions if b squared minus 4ac is negative. And so this is called the discriminant test. Well, let's take what we're given, because that's the whole point of this, and we can do this a lot quicker without the lesson. And so I'm going to take b squared, which is 100, minus 4 times a times c, which would be minus 320. And that is definitely going to be negative. So I'm going to have only complex roots, which means I have no real solutions. Or I get a calculator, I could have graphed the thing, and I would have saw that it is floating up above the x-axis and thus would not touch the x-axis, has no real solutions. So either way, you're good to go. Question 18. A certain park, which is better than an uncertain park, I never go to those, they can't make up their mind. But a certain park has an area of 11,863,808 square yards. What is the area in square miles of this park? Well, if 1 mile is 1,760 yards, then 1 mile squared must equal 1760 square yards. Well, if I take that into account, then I can just take my calculator, put in 11,863,808, and I'm going to divide that by 1760 squared. And I'm going to get out 3.83 square miles. So B is my friend. And the correct answer. Question 19. Which of the following equations represents a circle in the xy plane that intersects the y-axis at exactly 1 point? So it's tangent to the y-axis. So what that means then is that my x value has to be the square root of the radius, because I've got to have something like this. X value of the center, I should say. Say I had a circle that was centered right here. And to be tangent then to the y-axis, the radius has to equal the x or h of the center. And we're comparing this to x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals radius squared. So I want h, i.e. the x value of the center, to be equal to the square root of the radius. And I only see one equation where that happens, and that's C. So C is the correct answer. Question 20. Another question about similarities, similar triangles, or better yet, congruent triangles. Well, I do know that two triangles are similar if they have correspondingly congruent angles. And I also know that if I know two angles, if I know a side between them, or even another side, because I could have angle, side, angle, or I could have angle, angle, sides, congruence. So if I look at that, they told me, well, in ABC, if it's similar to DEF, well, B and E have the same measure. And they said that. They're both 27. And C and F have the same measure. They said that. They're both 41. And so what additional piece of information do I need? Well, as I said, I need that S for ASA or AAS. So I need two corresponding sides to be the same length. And in this statement, BC then would have to be the same length as EF. So C would be my best friend in this particular question. Question 21. In question 21, we're given two sets of data that are in bar graphs or histograms. It says it right here, two sets of data, 23 integers each, summarized in the histogram shown. For each histogram, the first interval represents the frequency of integers greater than equal to 10 but less than 20. And so this interval is going to be 10 to 19. The next one would be 20 to 29. The next one would be 30 to 39, and so forth. Now, what we don't know, other than the fact that they look like they're the same shape and they look like they were just shifted by 10, which makes us want to glom on to C as the answer, but that would be incorrect, and here's why. Because we don't know what the integers are in each bucket. We just know that they're in some interval, that they are in some interval. Okay, so the first in A could be all 20s for all we know. But then in the analogous stack in B, they could be all 20 or 19s. And so we have to think this. Well, if I did have to add up I could look at what would the mean be interval wise. So if I added up in A that I had 3 20s and 4 30s and 7 40s and 9 60s, well, then, and I added those all up and divided by 23, I'm going to get that the mean would be 39.6. But then if I go to the high end of the interval, 3 times 29 plus 4 times 39 plus 7 times 49 plus 9 times 59, then divide all that by 23, I'm going to get that the mean of A could be as high as 44.2. And if I do the same thing for B, because I've got 3 of these and 4 of those and 7 of those and 9 of those, but I could have all 10s or I could have all 19s in the first stack, all 20s or all 29s in the second stack. Well, I have the same idea that the mean for B is going to be somewhere between 29.6 and 38.6. And so if I look at that, well, the biggest that the mean could be for B and the smallest that the mean could be for A would give me the smallest possible difference between the means. And if I take that little mean of A, 39.6, minus the big mean possible for B, 38.6, then my smallest possible difference is 1. So B is the correct answer. And if you didn't get it, this is one of the trickiest problems on this test. Question 22 in Module 2, last one. A right triangle has legs of 24 and 21. If the length of the triangle's hypotenuse in centimeters can be written in the form 3 times the root of d, where d is an integer, what is the value of d? Well, I know that if I take the legs and square them and then add them together and take the square root of that sum, I should get the length of the hypotenuse by the Pythagorean theorem. And so if I look at that, well, this is going to be the square root of 3 squared times 8 squared, 24 squared, plus 3 squared times 7 squared, because 3 is 3 times 21 is 3 times 7. I can apply the square to both factors. And I can rewrite that as 3 squared times 8 squared plus 7 squared. Well, I can bring that 3 outside because it's a square. So this would be 3 times the square root of 64 plus 49. Or better yet, 3 times the square root of 113. Oh, there's D. So D is 113. And fin. Let's record an ending to that. I don't know if you want to put it on there. I hope that you all did well on this 392 test and only had to look at a few problems. And if some of my explanations were maybe a little bit different from what you did, well, there's a bunch of different ways we can solve any problem. I'm just trying to give you the easiest way to get there, the quickest way. It's a time test. And if you've been paying attention in lessons or been paying attention up through the 9th grade in math, the mathematics that I presented should be pretty straight ahead. I wish you the best of success in all your endeavors, especially the next test.